Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how you can automate your CyberPatriot Linux competition tasks by using Bash. Now, Bash is a really helpful scripting language which you've probably used if you've ever used the terminal before during a competition or otherwise. So uh, you can use Bash in the terminal, so you can say like use the Bash command ls and then ls, yeah, just ls to list all the files. You might have used that at some point. You might have used rm to remove a file, so I could say rm script.sh if I wanted to, but that's kind of important to my presentation, so I'm not going to do that. Uh, or you could. There are tons of different. There are literally several thousand different commands, just the ones that I have installed on my computer, and there are almost indefinitely more that exist. So. So what I'm going to be talking about today is how you can use Bash as it applies to scripting in CyberPatriot. So you can use it in the terminal, but you can also use it in a script. So in a script, you'll basically it's a glorified way of just putting a bunch of commands together and telling them all to run at once. There are some helpful things like these if statements and for statements that you'll probably want to know about. So I will be going through this basic script that I've written very quickly, based on that, which is actually very loosely based on the script that my team uses for competition, and which I was able to use during the practice round to finish the Linux image in 9 minutes. So it's a really, really good idea if you want to do well in CyberPatriot to go around and automate the more simple tasks that you would do during a CyberPatriot competition. In order to save time to work on the real hard stuff that will appear as competitions get more difficult later in the season. So, so I'll go through this script here and just explain what each of these lines does. So I'm going to skip this bit right here because if statements are a little bit more complicated, and I'll just start with an example of how a basic statement would work. So you have echo here. Echo just prints out whatever is inside these quotes to the terminal. So if you say echo removing netcat, it would just print removing netcat out right here. And then the next command, you probably actually type this during competition. This specific command right here is in the Linux checklist, but it uses some things that you might not have seen before. So when they have these dollar signs here, and then an opening quotation mark, an opening parenthesis, and then a command name, and then a closing parenthesis. What that is doing is it is running the command that's in here, then taking the output of that command and feeding it into this command here. So it's actually doing that twice because the netcat program can be named two different things, and RM can remove as many files as appear. So what whereas does here, whereas I can do where is NC. I have it on my computer for totally totally benign reasons. I'm not trying to use it as a hacking tool like CyberPatriot seems to think it always is. So it'll tell me the path to the program. So RM, as you might already know, just removes a file. So if you say RM whereas NC, this bit here will basically be transformed into the path to the program. And then RM will remove the file. And then whereas netcat, sometimes it's, as I mentioned before, the NC program is sometimes named netcat instead. So this will just remove, having both of them here basically accounts for either possibility. And RM can actually handle multiple files at once if I didn't already mention that. So if in the event that there are both versions of netcat installed, then it will be able to remove both of them, and the CyberPatriot scoring system will be happy. So next, let's move on to this if thing here. So ifs are a little bit complicated. There are a lot of weird idiosyncrasies and exceptions and different ways to like compare numbers and things like that. But this one here is relatively simple. So you just say if, and then you have a bracket, and then you have this here to run a command, and then this will be replaced with the output of who am I, which in Linux and other Unix-based systems, including Mac OS, just outputs who am I. Sorry, no, who am I outputs the name of the current user, so in my case, Bosani. And if you were sudoed into the root account, then it would output root. So this just says, if the result of who am I is not exclamation mark equals, that's the same thing as in Java, root, in quotation marks so that it knows it's a string. It would actually probably work if you didn't have quotation marks. Bash is a little bit inconsistent about when it does and does not want quotation marks to be placed, but typically it's just good practice to place them around anything that you're treating as a string. And then closing bracket, then a semicolon, then the word then, and then at the end you say fee, which means finish, and it's also if backwards. I think the latter is the actual reason why you're supposed to say fee at the end. When you have a case statement, which is a little bit more complicated version of an if, you say case, and you have a bunch of stuff, and then at the end you say esac, which is case backwards, which is frankly the messiest design of a scripting language I think I've ever seen. But that's what they're using. That's what's used now. So there's not really any choice. Nobody really has any choice in the matter. So just something to quickly note. If you're used to Java, you're probably used to typing semicolons at the end of every line. You do not need to do that in Bash. You can, if there's a new line or enter, whatever you want to call it, at the end of a line, it will just assume that there is that's the end of the statement, and it doesn't need to have a semicolon there. If, however, you want to put multiple statements on one line or multiple lines into one literal line, then you have to include a semicolon. So by saying if bracket whatever close bracket semicolon then, I'm basically saying that new line then, but it's just a little bit nicer of a way to say it because you're never gonna have if without a then at the end. So this is the convention for how to type if statements and also for statements, as I'll show you in a little bit. So yeah, so that's it. So you'll have if the user that's logged in is not root, which they need to be. They need to have root admin privileges in order to do most things in CyberPatriot, and thus in order to run most of the commands in this script. Then it will print out an error. The script must be run as root. And then it will exit the script with a status of 1, which basically means there was an error. Now, just so you know, there's nothing. The exit 1 has nothing to do with the if statement. I could take it out and it would still run perfectly fine, although all the other commands would also continue to run, and they wouldn't be able to because you're not root. So the exit 1 here does not pertain to the if statement. It just pertains to the script's actual runnability in the current configuration. So we already went over that. So next we have echo, changing user passwords. So users, this here is how you set a variable. So when you set a variable, you just say the name and then equals without a space around it. That's very important. Normally in many other languages, it doesn't really matter whether or not you include a space around, whether or not you include spaces for padding around the equal sign. But in Bash, you are specifically not supposed to do it, which is kind of the opposite of other languages. And it'll get confused and try to run users as if it was a command if you don't put that there. So yeah, so just always remember to not put spaces there when you're setting a variable in Bash. And then when you again, you're going to use this syntax here. So we're going to get the output ls/home, which is effectively it's a list of all of the user home directories, which is basically just a list of all the usernames on the computer. So we're saying set users equal to a list of all the user accounts on the computer, effectively. And then for you in users, and when you reference variables in Bash, you use this symbol here, the dollar sign or whatever you want to call it, for you in users, and you don't actually put a dollar sign here because you're creating a variable like you do above. When you create the variable, you do not use the dollar sign, but when you reference it, you do. So here you're saying for a new variable u in variable user. So it's a lot like the enhanced for loops in Java, for example, where you would say for int items, and then you might have brackets or whatever. Oops. You know what I mean? So this syntax here is a lot like it's pretty much analogous to this. By the way, you don't have to include the type of the variable. You don't have to include int or anything like that in Bash. It's a weakly typed language. It actually treats like pretty much everything like a string for some reason. And then if it needs to be interpreted as an integer, it pretty much just converts it to an integer automatically. It's a very, very messy language. That is something you will learn quickly about Bash, but it is very helpful at getting done what needs to be done. without tons of extra code. And also, it doesn't need to be compiled, so you can see I can actually run the file directly without having to use Eclipse or anything to compile it into Java bytecode. So yeah, so for you and users, it'll echo. This is a very good thing to know about bash scripting, which I'll explain in a minute. It'll run this command here, echo, and then the value of u, so whatever user it's on, colon CyberPatriot1 exclamation mark, and then exclamation marks has to be preceded by a backslash if you're just trying to use it as a string. It's a special character in bash for some reason, so that's just something you always have to do. It's just kind of an idiosyncrasy that you get used to as you write more and more bash scripts. So it'll run this here, and then this is a special character in bash especially. So this will actually take the output of this command. So in this case, it'll just be their username colon the new password, and then it'll take the output of that command and pipe it, as it's called, into the chpassword command here. So it'll just take that output and basically give it to the chpassword, say do whatever you want to with this content here. So the chpassword is just a helpful utility which allows you to easily get to pipe into it a new password in order to change it on Linux. So this fourth thing here will go through each of these users and change their password to CyberPatriot1. And in order to change their password to chpassword, you have to give it the username and then the password separated by a colon. So it's kind of a weird, messy way to do it, like most things in bash, but it's the only real way to do it automatically in a script. Just as an aside, you usually will not want to ever hard code a password into a script that you're going to set. So if you had another situation in which you were doing this, you probably would not want to state directly in your code what your password is. But in this case, there's not really another option because you're always going to be setting it as CyberPatriot1. So unless you want to defeat the purpose of automating this and make yourself type in CyberPatriot1 exclamation mark every time, there's not really a better option. It's not like you're actually securing it against intruders by setting all the passwords of all the users to the same thing. So yeah, again, that's just an aside. You don't really have to think about that if you're just going to be using this for CyberPatriot. And then here you're changing the password of root. Root is the user that has privileges to do everything, and it doesn't usually have a home directory in the /home folder. So when we list everything in /home, it's not going to include root. So this is just an extra. Yeah, so that's why you need to know about that. So another thing that's good to know that I'll demonstrate here, if you ever want to take the output of a command, so where is nc, and then put it into a file, which might be helpful if you're trying to add something to the end of a configuration file, for example, during a competition. You can say where is nc, and then put it into path.txt. And then it will create this file here, path.txt, or you could create it in /tmp/path.txt if you want to create it in the system's temp directory. It would put it in path.txt. This is just an example of how you can edit a file anywhere on the system, not just in your current directory. So it'll put whatever the output of this command was into path.txt. So I could do, if I wanted to do echo allow root login no, for example, if I was changing the SSH config, then I could do that, and then I could say /etc/c/ssh/sshd config. But actually in this case, hold on, sorry, I wouldn't actually want to do that because this overwrites everything in that file. And I don't want to wipe my entire config just to add one option. So instead I would do this to change, use 2 chevrons instead of 1 in order to just append to the end. So just stick this content at the bottom of the file. So that's useful in a lot of cases, but sometimes you just want to overwrite the whole thing and make that the only thing there. Obviously this won't work on my MacBook because I don't have that file, but that's how you would do it on Linux. So I don't have any examples of that in this script, but that's just an example of how you might want to use that at some point. So all of this code is available at this URL on GitHub. So yeah, you can go to github.com/ericboson/cpscript. This will also be linked in probably the description of this video, and you can look at all this code here. And if you have any questions, you can write a comment below this video, and I'll try to explain anything that you have a question about. So that's just a quick intro into how the very basic workings of Bash. You can do a lot with this language. We have on my team probably 700, 800 lines of code to automate every imaginable thing that you could ever want to fix in CyberPatriot. So that does take a lot of work, but it's a great thing to know how to do because you can save so much time on CyberPatriot. So I hope this has been helpful, and if anybody has any questions, please ask me. Thank you.